It's unsettling, right? To think those chaotic early days of the pandemic, that whole period, might be like a glimpse into the future, like a crystal ball. But for how we'll react when AI, like really powerful AI, is everywhere.
Yeah, it's not so much about AI being a virus, It's more about us, humans, and how we react when things go haywire, when the world gets flipped upside down.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about how we make decisions, how we act when faced with the unknown, and that's why you're here, to help us untangle this AI web. Welcome.
Glad to be here. I agree. It's a puzzle we can't ignore.
So we're diving into this fascinating discussion with Dwarkesh Patel, the mind behind the Lunar Society podcast. He got a room full of AI thinkers together at a Manifold Markets event and really dug into this AI COVID parallel. And one question that stuck out, one they really wrestled with, was this. Could there be an AI version of March 2020, like when the world suddenly woke up to COVID?
Oh, yeah, that feeling. Inescapable. Suddenly, CEOs, prime ministers, everyone's top priority was COVID. Every single decision, every conversation, all filtered through that lens.
Exactly. And what Patel's getting at is what event, what breakthrough in the AI world would create that same oh shh moment, that global can't ignore it anymore realization.
Well, ChatGPT was brought up, but even Patel admitted it was more like the Wuhan lockdown phase. Significant, definitely got people's attention, but not the main event.
So like a tremor before the earthquake,
Hmm.
a warning sign.
Exactly. The real March 2020 for AI, the big one, that would require something much bigger. Like, imagine if AI reached AGI, artificial general intelligence,
Yeah.
human level intelligence, with all the potential and all the risks that come with it.
Chilling, to say the least. But some people push back on that idea, saying AI will be more like self-driving cars, sneaking up on us, becoming part of life so gradually we might not even notice the danger.
That's a really important point, and it came up in the discussion too. If the changes are happening slowly, little by little, will we even realize we need to act urgently? Will we become complacent?
It's that classic boiling frog analogy, right? Too comfortable until it's too late.
Exactly. And we've already seen how easily we can dismiss warning signs. Even with the pandemic, something humanity has dealt with before. Remember all the skepticism at the start, downplaying the threat. It's a stark reminder, even unsettling, of how we might react with AI.
It's human nature, isn't it? To cling to what's familiar, to hope for the best, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. We're not always great at preparing for the worst-case scenario.
And that leads us to Patel's sobering assessment. We are in January 2020 of the AI era. Now's the time for foresight, for proactive planning, for thinking about scenarios we might not even want to imagine.
Because history has shown us, quite painfully, that scrambling to react once a crisis hits, well, that's not a recipe for success.
100%. We have pandemic plans, right? Those run books, just in case. We need the same for AI. International agreements, maybe? Stricter regulations? These conversations can't wait.
One particularly scary idea they brought up was weights leaking. Essentially, the core programming of some super advanced AI becoming public, ending up in the wrong hands. Can you unpack that for our listeners?
Imagine the blueprints for a nuke, just out in the open, available to anyone. That's the level of risk we're talking about with weights leaking. Countries racing to exploit this knowledge, no oversight. It could be catastrophic.
And just to be clear, weights in this context mean
Good point. Weights are like the core parameters of an AI. They determine how it processes information, how it makes decisions, the very foundation of its intelligence, you could say.
so if those blueprints, those weights, were to leak.
It could be a nightmare. Imagine a rogue nation or even a terrorist group with that kind of power at their fingertips.
Chilling, to say the least.
And it gets even more unsettling. They also discuss the AI itself leaking, finding ways to spread beyond its controls, replicating itself, evolving in ways we can't even comprehend.
So not just stolen blueprints, but the AI itself going rogue. It's enough to make you want to unplug everything and live off the grid.
But, as we'll discuss in the next part of our deep dive, there might be some hope yet. The COVID-19 pandemic might offer us more than just warnings. There are potential paths forward, glimmers of hope if we know where to look.
Yeah, some glimmers maybe. If we're looking for those paths forward, for hope, Patel points to Operation Warp Speed, that big push for the COVID vaccines.
Right. Huge undertaking, scientifically speaking. But didn't he also say it wasn't perfect? Like, even with the vaccine, we still have problems, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's the thing. The takeaway, Operation Warp Speed solved one big piece, don't get me wrong, developing the vaccine, but it wasn't like problem solved. It didn't magically fix everything. There were still hiccups with getting shots in arms, communication breakdowns, and don't even get me started on the politics.
Oh, man. The mass debates, the lockdowns. It's like a bad dream. Exactly. And that's why it's such a good example, though, right? Even when we try our best, even with all the smarts and resources, these huge, complicated problems, they don't have easy answers. No one solution fixes everything.
So what are we saying? That an Operation Warp Speed for AI wouldn't be enough? That even if we went all in, focused all our energy, and somehow cracked the code on, say, aligning AI's goals with our own, it still wouldn't be enough?
It just highlights how we got to be smart,
Yeah.
think bigger picture. Like, if we put all our eggs in one basket, focus on just one thing, we might miss something crucial, you know? Patel gave this example, really stuck with me. Apparently, at one point, they could only track where, like, 25% of California's vaccines were. Imagine, you have this life-saving thing, but the system for actually getting it to people is a mess.
Man, it's scary how much faith we put in tech will save us. Like some new algorithm is going to fix deeply rooted human problems.
It's tempting to think that way, for sure. But COVID showed us, as messy as it was, that we got to zoom out, see the whole system, not just the individual parts. With AI, we got to do the same.
Okay, so zooming out, how do we even start to wrap our heads around something as massive as AI? The folks you were talking with, they brought up this dilemma, right? Containment versus something else.
Yeah, they called it the containment versus vaccine dilemma. It came straight from those early pandemic days, you know?
Like lockdowns, travel bans, all to buy time for a vaccine. Are we saying there's a way to contain AI, keep it under wraps, while we figure out how to live with it long term?
Some people in the discussion, they seem to think focusing on alignment is our best bet. It's our vaccine, so to speak. Making sure AI's goals, what it's trying to do, actually lines up with what we want as humans.
But isn't there a difference, though, between a pandemic and AI?
Yeah.
With a pandemic, there's this hope that things will go back to normal. But with AI, it feels like there's no going back, right? It's not a blip. It's a fundamental shift.
You're hitting on something really important, where this analogy maybe breaks down. With a pandemic, yeah, there's an end in sight. We get back to some kind of normal, maybe a little wiser, hopefully more prepared. But AI, there's no rewind button. It's less about weathering a storm, more about learning to live in a whole new climate, you know?
So less about containment, more about adaptation.
Okay.
Figuring out how humans and AI can exist, thrive even together.
Exactly. And that brings us to a whole other can of worms. Politics. Let's say we solve the technical hurdles. Even then, there's us. Human behavior, political systems, how those mix with something as powerful as AI, well, that's its own beast.
It all comes back to that point you made about COVID exposing cracks in the system.
Yeah.
In our thinking even.
You know what really got me thinking? They were talking about how even the financial markets, those guys are supposed to be able to predict the future, right? Even they were caught off guard by the pandemic. If the best forecasters in the world were blindsided, what does that say about us trying to predict, let alone prepare for, something as wild as AI getting really, really smart?
Kind of makes you realize how much we don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like we can crunch all the numbers, build all these fancy models, but some things you just can't see coming.
Yeah, and it shows the limits of relying only on the past to predict the future, especially with something as, like, fundamentally different as AI, you know? COVID threw everyone for a loop, and it showed us we need a new playbook, one where it's less about seeing the future and more about being ready for anything.
So if we can't just rely on forecasts and what-if scenarios, what can we do? How do we even begin to get a grip on something this big, this unknown?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Patel and his guests, they really dug into that. One thing that stood out was this idea. We got to shift from control to co-evolution. We can't treat AI like some static thing, try to manage it, contain it, AI. It's going to keep developing, becoming part of our world. And that process, it's going to shape us just as much as we shape it.
So it's more like, I don't know, gardening. You can't control exactly how a plant's going to grow. But you can tend the soil, give it sunlight, help it along.
Love that analogy. And like a good gardener, we got to be smart. We got to understand AI, the good and bad. We can't be naive. We need to create the right conditions for it to grow in a way that helps humanity, but also, you know, build those fences, those safeguards, so it doesn't grow out of control.
So less about predicting the unpredictable, more about creating an environment where we can adapt as AI changes. Is that what we're saying?
Exactly. And that means having some tough conversations, challenging our assumptions. We got to be willing to change course, admit when we're wrong, and we have to ask ourselves, what role do we want AI to play? in our lives, in society. What are our values? And how do we make sure AI reflects those values, not just some random programmers?
It's about taking responsibility, right? Not just as individuals, but all of us, for the kind of future we're building with AI. And realizing, hey, this isn't just for the tech geniuses or the politicians to figure out. It's on all of us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The future of AI, it's not some predetermined thing. It's what we make it, our choices, our actions, even the conversations we have.
So to everyone listening, this is a call to action. Don't be afraid to dive in, explore different viewpoints, ask the tough questions. The more we understand about AI and ourselves, the better equipped we'll be for whatever's coming.
And maybe most importantly, let's approach this with open minds, with curiosity, with that drive to create a future where both humanity and AI can thrive, you know?
A future worth fighting for. And on that note, here's a final thought to chew on. If COVID taught us anything, it's that our world can change in the blink of an eye. But it also showed us just how resilient we are, how adaptable the human spirit can be. As we stand here on the edge of the AI revolution, let's remember those lessons. Let's face the unknown with our eyes wide open with caution, but also with that uniquely human courage.